Hey, and welcome to Journey with Jesus. I'm your host and author, Johnny Singh, and this is a platform that's dedicated to your spiritual uplift and Christian encouragement. Today, we've got a pretty good guest with us. His name is Creston Frizzell, and I'm excited to have him on the platform. We're going to be discovering a little bit about his life, and he's going to be sharing his story with us, and we'll get to know him together. So let's get into it. All right. Thank you for being here again with us on Journey with Jesus. I've got a pretty good guest with us, Creston Frizzell, and I haven't been able to know him as much as I would like to yet, but hopefully we both can get to do that today. Creston is one of the local ministers, or at least the minister for the Hialeah Church of Christ down in Hialeah, Florida. And he's been there for how long now, for Creston?
It's been almost 8 years now. It'll be 8 years in
Wow.
July.
Yeah. Man, you don't look a day over 25, so I don't know how you've been there for as long as you have.
I feel quite a bit older than that.
I've gotten to know about Creston a little bit because we share connected strings in our life. I'm a graduate of the Florida School of Preaching, and so is Creston. And at the time that I was in the School of Preaching, my tenure, two of the local guys that's a part of the local congregation there in Hialeah, Eddie and Gavin, you'll get to see them on future episodes. They're members of the local congregation there that Creston ministers for, and those guys came to school. So I got to hear a lot about him and a lot about his ministry, and I've been able to tune in a little bit online and look at some of his lessons, and I think he's a pretty cool guy. And I fell in love with his style of preaching when I got to recently hear him at the Florida School of Preaching lectureship. And man, just a dynamic speaker, just a beautiful guy, pretty authentic, transparent. And those are the kind of Christians you definitely want to sit down with and spend some time with. So I'm excited to hear his story, hear his journey with Jesus. And I hope that you're excited to do that as well. Creston, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where you're from? You got a family? What's going on with your life? Let's hear.
Well, I don't know if I'd, represent all the glowing statements you have about me as accurately as I probably should. But yeah, I've been here at Hialeah now for almost 8 years. Before that, we were up in Missouri. Hannibal, Missouri is where we lived before, and we were there. I was there, I believe, 4 years and 1 month, almost to the day, I think it
Wow.
was.
Yeah.
And yeah, so been preaching now for almost 12 years out of school. And I graduated from the school in 2013. So I started about 2011 or sometime around then.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I've been, I guess in some ways preaching for about 14 years now, which
Wow.
is, it's gone by a lot quicker than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
But
How old were you when you stepped into the ministry?
I was 21 when I
Mm.
started school, I believe, right around there, and I was 22, I think, almost 23 when I was hired for my first job.
So that's some similar circumstances there. I was 21 when I graduated as well. And that's when I got my, no, actually, let me see here. I graduated in December 2021. So yeah, I had just turned 21 and I got my first part-time sort of ministering tenure. You know, we say part-time as ministers, but that just means full-time.
Yeah, full time without going to an office every day,
That's
basically.
right. So I started that when I was 21. So yeah,
Wow.
wow.
Yeah, I mentioned at the lectureship at FSOP that it's not easy to find a job whenever you're
Hmm.
that young. So that's pretty cool that you did. I think you said you're at Lake Placid now. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm ministering in Lake Placid, Florida, and it's just a small group of Christians. It's generational, mostly for the membership. We're starting to get a few more newer faces and folks from the community that have started to discover us. But from what I understand, that congregation has been there for a few generations
Yeah,
now.
they
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but Lake Placid was the first place that I actually preached at.
Wow.
I was there. I guess I was their part-time
Yeah.
minister for my second year of preaching school. The entire
Wow.
time I was in school that second year, I was preaching at Lake Placid.
Yeah, man. Well, we gotta figure something out here. See, I'm learning as much as everybody else right now. We've got to make some connections. I'd love to have you back down there. So, if it opens, if opportunity comes up and you can leave, I know when you're practically sort of the only minister at a congregation, leaving is like
Yeah,
such a task sometimes. But
yeah,
if we can figure something out, we got to get you down there, man, to come say hi to the folks again and speak with us. That'll be awesome.
There's a lot of really good people there at Lake Placid for sure, and I really appreciated them for all the ways that they helped me, I guess. But I will tell you, I do have an easier time leaving than I usually take advantage of. I don't leave very often, but as you mentioned, Gavin and Eddie, they're still down here, and
Hmm.
we've got a lot of really good men that do a good job preaching. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
let me know anytime.
We'll figure that out. We will. Now, you said you were in Missouri for a little while before that.
Yeah, just over 4 years I was preaching there. That was my first full time work, I guess.
Now, Creston, are you a native of Florida? Were you born and raised in Florida?
I was born in Arkansas and
Okay.
kind of raised back and forth. We lived in
Yeah.
Arkansas for a while, lived in
Hmm.
Tennessee for a little bit when my dad went to the Memphis School of Preaching, so we lived there for a little while. And then we kind of went back and forth between Florida and Arkansas.
How in the world did you end up in Missouri?
My dad was actually born and raised in Missouri, so a little bit, my family's kind of from that area, I guess. But yeah, that getting to Missouri actually it wasn't where I expected to go. I told my wife when I applied for that job that I'd never live in Missouri again. I actually went through basic training for the Army at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and so I didn't ever want to go back there again.
Yeah.
When you believe that God has other plans sometimes, and that's where we
Wow.
ended up.
Yeah, man. So now your dad's a preacher, and I got to meet and love him as well, Terry. Are you second generation with preaching, or was there more preachers in your family?
Technically, I think I'm fourth. My great grandpa, he was a part time preacher. He had a
Yeah.
full time regular job and then he preached on the weekends. And then my grandpa was a full time preacher for 60 years or close to that, maybe. And then, my dad has preached now for 35 years or somewhere in that range too. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I guess a full time preacher, third generation, but
Yeah.
I'm fourth
But you've
generation
got
preacher. Yeah.
family, yeah, that's been exposed to that. Wow.
Yeah.
My dad's a preacher. My eldest brother is a preacher, and I'm a preacher. I've got another
Really.
brother, he's a chef, but I guess my brother and I would be second generation because my dad was the first one to become a Christian in his family. Then, of course, we were raised in the church as a result of that. So you've been in Florida now for over 8 years, you said, or have you just been
Almost
there
eight
long?
years.
Almost 8 years.
Yep.
Almost 8 years. Tell us a little bit. I know I got to say briefly hi to your wife. And from what I understand, she's a beautiful young lady and a great person. I know Eddie and Gavin has said a few things about your family as well. It's just really neat. What's your family dynamics like? How is it that as a preacher, you have been able to balance being a husband and a preacher and then just a all around friend of many others? I know sometimes that's a difficult thing to you or to
Yeah.
do, but have you even learned how to do that yet? I know I haven't.
I mean, sometimes it's easier than other times for sure. There is a benefit. My wife, Adina, she actually comes from a preacher's family as well. Her dad is a preacher, and both of her brothers are preachers too. So, it's kind of in the family, I guess.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier for, I guess, home life, for us to be able to just deal with whatever we got to do. At times we travel or have to go places for work or whatever. And, it's just kind of normal, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that didn't come easy. That wasn't always easy to adjust to, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you've been raised in the church. Were there ever moments in your life where you thought as a young man, this is what I want to do? I want to minister to other people. This is what I want my life to become like?
When I was young, definitely not. I actually, when growing up with a preacher's dad, everybody, especially when my dad preaches in Stuart, Florida, and they got a really good congregation there, a lot of really good people. But when we were there, I was a teenager whenever we moved there, almost a teenager when we moved there. And a lot of people called me PK for preacher's kid, And so I always kind of resented that. But, one of the men who's actually an elder there now, he still even jokes to this day that he would always tell me no matter what I'd say or what I'd do, he'd always tell me, I'd get in trouble and he'd say, it don't matter. You're going to be a preacher here one of these days. Just wait.
Yeah,
And I tell him, not going to happen. Not going to happen. And,
yeah,
yeah, to this day, he still reminds me that he told me I was going to be a preacher and he got it
yeah.
right.
Yeah, that's sort of, I actually just uploaded an episode recently about that I went from a PK to a P, I went from a preacher's kid to a preacher. And it was very similar. I sort of resented that when I was growing up as well. I
Yeah,
thought that at least folks in the church as well as folks outside of the church had some unrealistic expectations of you
yep,
as a result
for
of it.
sure.
And I did not want to do that. Now, I did fall in love with song lead and I love to sing and I love leading songs in church. So when I just moved here, I was actually asking, did the school have a song leading program? Can I just minister in music and learn how to become a song leader for the church? And I remember Brian Kenyon saying, no, no, you've got to be a preacher, man. You've got to be
Yep,
a preacher.
yep. You could do song leading on the
On
side.
the side,
Yep,
yeah. And I know congregations like that too. If you're a preacher that can do everything else, they feel like they've got a steal right there.
yep, that's right. Yeah, I've just actually started here in Hialeah. We do our song leading by month. So one man will lead for a month and the next man will lead for a month. And they've just recently inserted me into that rotation because I love song leading too. And
Yeah.
so now I finally get to take part in the song leading and still get to preach. So that can be a little draining on those days and
Yeah,
my voice
yeah.
gets pretty weak, but
Hmm.
I have a blast with it.
Yeah. Now, you did mention that that gentleman that was a or is a part of the congregation when you were younger that was making mention of you becoming a preacher. Let's explore that trail for a little bit. Are there other people in your life that sort of helped to shape and influence your path as a Christian? Maybe inspirations or just people in passing that sort of stuck out to you that made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, there were quite a few of them. You know, I don't know. You kind of mentioned that you were in love with song leading and kind of resented the whole preacher thing. I think I took that kind of to the extreme level. I guess the resentment, not the you know song leading and just taking a
Sure.
different avenue. I was baptized when I think I was 11 initially, but at the time, I had a dad who was a preacher. At the time, he wasn't preaching, but he had been a preacher for 10 years or so at that point, and he was still a preacher. We had a gospel meeting up in Arkansas at the time, and a lot of my friends got really motivated, and they were wanting to be baptized, and so I said, "Yeah, I'll join in," and so I did it too. Without really understanding what I was doing, I didn't have that kind of motivation in myself to
Yeah.
really understand. So when we moved to Stewart, kind of, had people kind of pushing me to that you're a PK or a preacher's kid or whatever, and or you're going to be a preacher when you get older. Uh, watching my dad preach, I kind of pushed away from that as far as I could. I really struggled growing up, battling. I really struggled with a few things, and one of them mainly was that I didn't see the proofs of God, and I didn't have a good belief in God because of that. And
Mm.
so there was that battle in myself. And so instead of taking the logical decision, which is trying to find that evidence and see whether or not God is real and whether or not the Bible is true, I decided since I didn't know it, I was just going to fight against it as much as I
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while. Then when I was 18, it was humorous because a lot of those people at Stewart, they watched me fight against that. And as much as I thought I was fooling them, they knew that I was fighting against it as much as I was. But they continued steadily, no matter what I was doing, how off the wall I got. They steadily and consistently were just continuously pushing me in the right direction and always being encouraging, always with a smile on their face whenever they saw me, no matter what I was doing. They were always real encouraging.
Yeah.
So watching them, I guess, be that way and have that kind of mindset, it slowly chipped away at my hardness of heart, I guess you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And so when I was 18, I was just about to leave for the Army. Right after I graduated high school, I was about to leave and join the Army. And I started to kind of soften up a little bit, I guess,
Yeah.
and just their continuous motivation for me and encouragement. And then my dad one day, he stood up and preached a sermon on, what it means to be a dad and how to be a good dad. And that really kind of hit a chord in me because I always wanted to be a dad. And so that
Yeah.
always kind of struck a chord in me about thinking forward who I was going to be, whether I was going to keep on fighting against everything I knew I shouldn't be fighting against, or whether I was going to grow up and do what I needed to do. And so my dad got to baptize me correctly with good understanding when I was 18 years old. This still wasn't always easy at that point. When I left for the Army, I wasn't always doing the right thing. I even came back from that after I got out of the Army. It was one of the lowest points of my life. I was at as rock bottom as you can be rock bottom at that
Yeah.
point. Didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Didn't know where I was going to go, and again, I came back to Stewart with a congregation there, and with open arms, they brought me in. Still had that same smile, still was that same encouragers as they always were, and I kind of just made up my mind that I was gonna get my life in order and be a
Yeah.
preacher.
Yeah.
So yeah, truthfully, there's a lot of people that had a lot of big influences in my life.
Sure.
My dad and my grandpa, teachers at the School of Preaching, and Brian Kenyon and all those great men, Jackie Steersman. But the congregation at Stewart set a pretty immaculate example
Wow.
of encouragement that is not replicated at other places as much as it should
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really beautiful. You sort of think of Ephesians 4 and 5, where Paul says that once we become one in the same faith, under the same Lord and the same baptism, that we eventually become knitted and joined together. And that's really neat that you had that exposure to Christian family that was like that. That's a very similar story to my man. And again, I just shared that on the episode that I did. I got baptized when I was 11. And from 11 to like about 15, 14 years old, man, I was like all excited about Christianity. I wanted to do everything in the church. But by the time I hit 15, 16, and life started to expose me to other things, I too did step away. And from like ages 15 to 18, I was totally off, man. And again, there were members in the church that knew, but they were still being embracing of me. And, family knew, but they were still being embracing of me. And there was those turning points for me as well, because just like that, when I was 18, I had migrated to a different foreign country and I was going to pursue a job there. And it was this one mission trip when I was 19 that I was invited on a mission trip to Barbados, and some men that are great influences along with my parents, we went there together. And that really sparked up in me why I know that I love to be a part of God's people instead of pushing it away. But there was that point in my life, like about a year and a half, where just like there were lack of evidences here and there for me. And in so that there were so many inconsistencies with people, I was conditioned to believe that once you become a Christian, then you're supposed to be perfect. And I
Yeah,
mean, not perfect in terms of complete with Jesus, but perfect as in faultless and without mistakes. And when I didn't see that in figures that I look up to in my life as Christians, that sort of told me, well, if God is supposed to make you perfect and you're not perfect, then this can't be true. That's what I
yeah,
convinced myself to think. So I pursued Islam for a while when I started to study the Quran and learn a few things there. And then I actually pursued some other secular religions. And it just so happened, man, that in my pursuit of other things, I kept coming back to the Bible. And then I want to say providentially, that door opened for me to go to Barbados right in that gap. And when I was there, there were so many people that I saw open the Bible and expose things in a way that I've been really wanting to see and hear for myself. And that's when they said, hey, if you've been struggling with studying and understanding and seeing quote unquote inconsistencies, why don't you come to a place that dedicates themselves to studying that? And that's what pushed me there. But like you said, I came to the school and I still had faults here and there because I'm having to slowly chip away at the cultural conditioning of who I was to now who I'm trying to become. I know Eddie and Gavin helped me out a lot with that, man. There were some days where I just said to myself, I'm going to quit, guys. I'm going back home. I can't do this anymore. I literally packed my duffel bag one time and Gavin locked the door and said, you're going to sleep right here in this bedroom with us. You don't think you're going anywhere, man. You're going to be right here. We'll figure this out. So yeah, man, it's always encouraging when you've got Christian family around you that wants to squeeze out of you what God already has put in you, even though you can't see it for yourself. So that's really beautiful that you had that encouragement when you did, man. I know it came out to the product you are. You're a great husband and a great preacher, and I know you're a good friend of others. Let me ask you this real quick. I was talking to my dad about this in an episode. And there was something that I learned, a scripture particularly when I was in the school of preaching, that sort of helped to ground me. And it's Second Timothy chapter 2, verses 24 through 26, where Paul says that a servant of the Lord must not be quarrelsome, but gentle to all and able to teach, long suffering. And he just describes in those few verses the kind of servant that God desires to minister in his kingdom. And that stuck with me. And I sort of imprinted that and engraved it on my heart. And that's helped me, kept me grounded, kept me motivated, and ensured that I stayed where I needed to be. Are there places in the Bible that has done that for you? Sometimes as preachers, it's hard not to say the whole Bible. But
yeah.
has there been places where you're like, these few scriptures or these few chapters or books or stories, they definitely imprinted on my heart and helped?
There's for sure. I mean, there's a lot of places I could go to, for sure, but there's a couple in particular I think that always are kind of my go-to. There's a few, I guess. One of them is First Thessalonians chapter 5, when Paul tells us to, uh, to live a quiet life, to mind our own business, and to do our work with our hands. And I always love that passage because it tells us that we need to be working on ourselves, not worrying about others, not worrying about what other people are doing, but worry about our own selves and our own life and what we're supposed to be taking care of
Yeah.
ourselves. And especially, uh, I think over the last decade, I don't know, I haven't been alive for 50 years or anything, so I don't know what life was like back then, but at least it appears to me like, because of social media and the way technology works nowadays, that we get really, really focused on other people. And we so much are involved in other people's lives, which is a good thing to some extent, but it can become really problematic. And so that verse has always struck a chord with me whenever I start hearing about other people or what other people are doing, or comparing my life to another person, or thinking this person's got all these blessings I don't have, or this person's got all this sin in their life, I don't know why they don't fix it or do better.
Hmm.
It's always important to me to remind myself to mind my business. This doesn't have anything to do with me. It's
Yeah.
not my concern. If they want to talk to me about it, I'll talk to them about it. But if they don't
Yeah.
want to, I need to keep my nose where it belongs, which is in my own
Yeah.
situation.
I think you do very well in the Caribbean, man. There's actually there's a few popular songs in the Caribbean, and one of it, the chorus is "Mind Your Own Business,"
Yep.
and it exposes the idea of how, well, I guess there's a cultural thing that's similar here. The keeping up with the Jones. I've heard that phrase here a
Yeah.
couple of times. So there's a few things like that in the Caribbean as well, with nosy neighbors looking over your fence and trying to, see what's going on in your life to expose you or do all this kind of stuff. So yeah, yeah, wow.
So
First
the
Thessalonians.
other ones that I think of, not to waste all your time, but the other ones that I think are really important to me. The one that kind of was the original one for me was Second Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, when Paul talked about all of the suffering that he's gone through, all the trials that he had, and he was trying to talk to Timothy about all those things. But he said in Second Timothy 1:12 that he wasn't ashamed of those things, but that was the reason that he became a minister of the gospel. And one of the things I think I really struggled with when I was learning to be a Christian as I needed to be a Christian, learn how to be a preacher, was to, step into a world that I didn't know for
Yeah,
so long, in a world that I wasn't involved in and that I pushed away. And in my, I guess, desire to push that away as much as I could, it almost built up in me that I felt ashamed whenever I was living as a Christian, that talking about those things was almost shameful to me because I conditioned myself to that extent. And so it really took a while for me to work that out of myself and to realize this isn't anything to be ashamed about. This is
yeah,
something to be prideful about. If you have the grace of God in your life, why would you have shame about that? That needs to be the
hmm,
greatest thing in your world.
yeah,
Just like you'd brag about a job or an accomplishment in your life, greater than all those things is Jesus. So why wouldn't you brag about that and be thankful for it and be talking about it to everybody? And
yeah,
the final one is Romans 11, verse 33, when Paul talks about the depths of the riches, the wisdom, knowledge of God, how unsearchable his ways and his judgments past finding out. That to me has always been really important in the process of my growth as a Christian and as a preacher, just, as a person, is learning, I guess, the foundation of learning not to be ashamed of God, and the foundation of not being ashamed of who you are and what you are or where you come from, or learning to mind your own business or anything. The foundation of all those things is to remember that God is a really awesome God.
yeah,
And I guess the more we learn about him, the greater everything gets in our life, and the greater everything about our mind and our family, our church, our Christian walk with God, everything gets better the more you learn that God is awesome,
yeah,
and to remember how little we are, and just to rely on him and to trust in him in everything.
yeah,
I think that changes my perspective a lot more. I needed a lot of humility when I started preaching,
hmm,
it took me a while to learn. Being a preacher's kid and a preacher who was stepping into that role as well, it kind of came with a hot head for a little while. And I had to learn that this doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm just a little tool that God uses for a time. If I'm not doing my job, God is going to put somebody else in my place to do my job for me. So this isn't because I'm so good. This is because God's so good. And so, it should all be about him and remembering how amazing he is.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, man. There's so many instances where I'm sure lots of people sometimes think to themselves that, like you said, there's a lot of areas where you should be ashamed of who you are now as a result of who you once were. And that's that touches me, man. I'm glad you shared that as well. I had to deal with that as well in my life. And sometimes I feel like my thorn in the flesh is imposter syndrome, the reality of sort of who do I identify with? Do I identify with the person that I was grappling onto and trying to hold on to tightly that served his flesh? Or am I trying to hold on to the person that the Holy Spirit wants me to become? So thank you
Yeah,
for
for
sharing
sure.
that, man. Really, thank you for sharing
So
that.
the best way for me to learn to overcome that was to learn God is a truly great God. And
Amen.
if he truly is that great, then there's no reason all those things in the flesh, they don't even matter. None of those things matter. It's just everything should be about God if we truly do love him.
That's right. And that's why this platform exists, Creston. It's for other people to recognize that sometimes faith can be sort of misunderstood in the world, and sometimes we're conditioned to think that Christians are these uptight, perfect people that point our nose down on others. And when you actually get to talk to somebody that's a Christian, we're talking to a minister, we got talking to two ministers here. You get to see that everybody has different levels of faiths. Everybody has got different aspects in their journey. And the biggest thing is Jesus just wants you to walk with him. He just wants you to listen to his voice and walk alongside him with the intention that the closer you get to him, the closer you look like him. And there's people that think they're too far behind the pack to keep up with him, but that's not true. That's not true. And that's why we're
Or
here.
that you've gone too far in the opposite
Yeah,
direction that you can't
that's
get
right.
back.
That's right.
And if anybody's feeling that way, by the way, I'll tell you, there's not a lot of people who got further away from God than I did. But it doesn't matter how far away you get, God is still able to reach out and grab hold of you and pull you back.
Yeah. What would you share to people out there, Creston? You've been able to just give us a good overview of your life and how Jesus has impacted you and your journey with him. There's people out there that I'm sure that are listening and probably having questions of, whether or not they're good enough for Jesus. Maybe their hearts is constantly against them, or maybe that reoccurring sin, makes them feel imperfectly, unattainable by him. If there's somebody out there that needs to hear a few kind words to know that they can journey with Jesus, what would you say to them?
What I always say whenever people talk to me about them being too far away, or they don't see how they can live a life with God, or life's too difficult to make that decision, or they just don't know where to begin, or maybe they're not as good a Christian as other people, or not as good as other people, or whatever. The thought that always enters my mind is 2 Corinthians 12. Paul, after he talked about in chapter 11 all the suffering he went through, all the pain that he had to endure as a minister of the gospel. In chapter 12, then he talks about his humility, that even though Paul's the greatest minister that the church ever had, and yet even though that was the case, said, he had thorns in the flesh, he had troubles that he had to go through, but it had nothing to do with him whenever he did a good thing. It was all about God. God was strong in Paul's weaknesses. And I think that's an important idea that we all kind of have to get our mind wrapped around. You know, some people might think we're too far away from God that we can come back. Well, we're not. No matter how weak you are, God is strong enough. His grace is beautiful enough and powerful enough. It picks everybody up. It can pick anybody up. Not only that, but if you're not as good as somebody else as a Christian, sometimes we think that somebody else is a really good Christian. We're just not a good enough Christian, or somebody's a better preacher and I'm not a good enough preacher. It shouldn't be about whether we're as good as somebody else. It should be about, do we serve the same great God? And if we do, nothing else even matters. Our goal should just be to serve him. I might not be as good at avoiding sin as somebody else, but God is just as good about washing away my sin as he is somebody else's. I think that's the idea I always want to put in people's heads is God's grace is so good. It doesn't matter how good we are. What matters is, are we living in his grace or not? And if we're living in his grace, then there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to worry about. There's nothing to struggle with. We just got to focus on Him. And we are going to struggle. But if it's all about God, it doesn't matter what happens in our life. It doesn't matter what our anxieties are. It doesn't matter what our depressions are. It doesn't matter our jealousies. None of those things matter. It's all about God. And if it's all about God, everything is always exactly as it needs to be.
If you had one statement, and I'm thinking of one to define your life thus far, would you describe it as this? Because of His grace.
Yeah, I'd for sure say so.
Yeah. Creston, how can people get in contact with you? If somebody's in the Hialeah area and they want to visit the congregation or maybe figure out how to get a hold of you or see where you've got content out there for them to listen to lessons, how can people get in touch if they want to know about Jesus through you?
Currently, the best way to reach out to us is if you go to our Facebook page. It's the Hialeah Church of Christ, Hialeah Church of Christ on Facebook. We have a Facebook page that has a lot of we have all of our Bible studies, all of our Sunday morning worships are on there. Our Wednesday evening Bible studies are live streamed on there too, so you can find all those things. And then we have contact information as well. Somebody could send me an email, CrestonF, CRESTONF @bellsouth.net, and I'm happy to respond to any of those. And if you want to get my phone number, just send me an email, let me know you need my phone number, and I'll give it to you.
Sounds good.
We could talk.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you for sharing as much as you did. It's been a good conversation with you. I got to learn a lot and I got to be encouraged by a lot of what you said. Just as a young minister myself, there's a lot of relatability there. And that's what I was hoping for. I hope that everybody that shares their journey can help others relate to them as well. Thank you, man. Is there anything else you want to say to anybody out there?
Well, just say if anybody that had an influence on me growing up is listening, or any of our teachers or whatever, our teachers, because you had some of the same ones I did, then I appreciate everybody that was involved or has been involved in my life. God is a great God. I think that's all that needs to be said.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, thank you for joining us again on Journey with Jesus. I'm your host and author, Johnny Singh. We're so grateful that Creston Frizzell was able to share with us his journey with Jesus, and we hope to see you next time when we get to have other discussions with other beautiful people in Christ. See you next time.